So the presentation that we are doing today is the Sikh turbans in 21st century. And in a few moments, you'll get to see me as well. And you'll notice that I am a Sikh woman, not wearing a turban. So you might think, am I really the right person to be talking about the Sikh turbans in Canada? But that's exactly the nuance that we'd like to talk about and discuss with you all today, which is that turbans are not only a garment that is worn by individuals, they hold a cultural importance, a spiritual importance, as well as sacred importance. And today in our presentation, we'd like to touch on each of those notions around turban. So let's begin. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, we are keeping a lot of time at the end of the presentation where we would be happy to receive any comments or questions from everyone who's attending. And at this time, if I could also ask maybe Dr. Sandra to let me know if my voice is coming clearly through and if the level's good.
It's perfect. It's doing really well. What I'm just going to do is just ask the people who are not speaking, the attendees, if you can just mute your microphones, that would be great, because then we don't pick up any background noise. So just in case it's not muted, I may actually mute your microphones if there are some background noise happening. And I just wanted to welcome everyone as well. So I'll let you carry on. I'm recording the session as well.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sandra. Okay, so let's begin. So first, we'd like to kind of share a little story about turbans. So the exact origin of turban is unclear, but if you'll notice on a picture on your left-hand side, a turban-like garment was found on a royal Mesopotamian sculpture, which dates as far back as 2300 BC. So it is the earliest known example of a turban in our world, and it predates any Abrahamic religion as well. So certainly Sikhism as well. So you will notice that the use of turbans is done all over the world. So in India, Middle East, Europe, Africa, the turban protects its wearers from sun, rain, or cold. In some regions, in our history, only believers had the privilege to wear a turban, while other cultures mandated that non-believers assume certain colors of turban. So an interesting fact is that in 18th century Egypt and Syria, Christians were mandated to wear blue turbans and Jews were mandated to wear yellow turbans. The Samaritans wore red and the Muslims wore white turbans. So turban is not a new concept, and it is usually worn all over the world to a different level or for different reasons. So why are we talking about a turban today? We are discussing turbans around a Sikh context, and that's because Sikhs are generally the importance and the significance of turbans is a very sacred as well as a political concept for them. And so often, even when Sikhs are not within a space or country, they tend to, not only lobby for their right to wear a turban, but they certainly advocate for an equality that comes along with wearing a turban. So that's the story we'll talk about today, which starts in India. So we're talking about 16th century India, where you'll notice on the left-hand side of our screen, the Indian emperor is wearing a turban. So in 16th century India, as well as most of the other parts of the world, only royal entourage and high officials were permitted to wear turbans. The garment was a symbol of status. It was often decorated with peacock plumes and ornaments. In other religions, such as Hinduism in India at that time, the strict caste system, which was a system to organize the society based on hierarchy, it forbade individuals of certain castes, especially the lower castes, from wearing turbans. So in the mid-1600s, turban was actually used as a way to segregate the population in India at that time. So the ruling class had the authority to wear turbans, and the lay individuals were forbidden from wearing turbans. In fact, because it was quite common for people in India at that time to wear turbans, those who continued to wear turbans were persecuted. So forced conversions were common in any political regime at that time in the world. So forced conversions, along with fundamentalist policies, sat very uncomfortable with the growing Sikh population. So at this point in the story, I will introduce an individual to you whom the Sikhs lovingly call their ninth guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. He at that time was not only a leader of the Sikh population,
Walter of the Cook Report. You had so good to see you on this Monday night as we
I'm hearing a disturbance coming through. I'm not sure if this is somebody trying to ask a question, but I will kindly request everyone who is on this presentation to mute your mics and maybe hold your questions towards the end of the presentation, because we were not able to clearly understand what was being said throughout the mic. Okay, so going back to the story, we were talking about Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji. He had become a symbol of a social-political challenge to the oppressive political regime at that time. So the Sikh movement was rapidly growing, and the Guru was openly encouraging the followers, who were called Sikhs at that time, to be fearless in their pursuit of just society. He commented at that time that he who holds none in fear nor is afraid of anyone is acknowledged as a man of true wisdom. This was a statement, and I am transcreating it currently. It's in the sacred scriptures of the Sikhs in Guru Granth Sahib on page 1427. So while Guru Tegh Bahadur, the ninth Guru of Sikhs, his influence was rising, the emperor at the time had imposed religious laws that demolished schools and temples and forced new taxes on those that were not converting to the definition of religion of the emperor of India at that time. So those that were trying to avoid religious persecution at that time came to the royal court of Guru Tegh Bahadur, the ninth Guru of the Sikhs, to seek refuge from the forced conversions. And the Guru promised to protect the refugees due to his conviction of oneness in humanity. So the Guru, in this endeavor, was summoned by the emperor to Delhi under a pretext to have a conversation. And upon his arrival, he was imprisoned and asked to abandon his faith and convert. The Guru refused, and so did his associates that had accompanied him to Delhi. And following a few weeks, the Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji was tortured, and many of the other followers at that time were also asked to abandon their faith and were forced to convert. And if they didn't, they also faced execution. So this was the context around which the turban is being considered by Sikhs. So on the right-hand side of the picture, you'll see Guru Gobind Singh, and he is the son of the ninth Guru of the Sikhs. He, in 20 years after that execution, called all his followers who would combat the forces of injustice, tyranny, and oppression that ran for decades in the political regime of India. Those who answered his calls were mandated to wear turbans. And that it is in that time period, which is 1699 in India, that turban for Sikhs became an act of defiance against political tyranny. The Sikhs started to look at turban as a sign of freedom, as a symbol of equality, and as a way to end all persecutions based on differences. So this is what's happening in India in early 1700s. So in 1800s, the British Army annexes the Sikh Empire. which is significant because the Sikh Empire in India was one of the last empires to be annexed by the Imperial British Army and became part of the British India. The Sikh Empire, because of its valor and skills in military, was a sought after recruitment of soldiers for the British Army. And so the British began recruiting Sikhs to fight for the empire in both of the world wars. The British Army also was aware of the caste issues that existed in the Indian society. And in order to build cohesiveness, they mandated all soldiers of Indian origin to wear turbans. So in this slide, you'll notice Indian soldiers of various origins wearing turbans, and on the right-hand side, you'll notice a soldier who was part of a Scottish regiment sporting a tartan-styled turban as well. So the British actually triggered one of the most significant shifts in how the turban became an identity symbol as well, because they mandated the style of the turban, the colors, the size, and at some times how it was going to be worn by individuals as well. And so as time goes on and we are approaching the late 1800s, the early 1900s, the Sikhs are fighting in the world wars. After the war's end, number of Sikhs began to leave India for various different British colonies. And one of these British colonies is Canada in the post-war years. So initially, they were greeted with respect and honor for their role in the wars. The gestures of gratitude, such as free cinema tickets, were common, but their glory was slowly forgotten, and the turban began to be seen as an obstacle to integration. Because the act of removing your hat indoors was a time-honored tradition in a lot of new countries that the Sikhs found themselves in. In medieval Europe, any knight who failed to remove his helmet or lift his visor to identify himself could face fatal consequences. Removing helmets as a sign of vulnerability built trust when in presence of royalty, later in church, and then in presence of women. So the Sikhs found themselves in a conundrum in these new spaces where keeping turban on, which was a sign of equality and a sign of freedom to them, began to be confused as a sign of disrespect and a lack of etiquette in these spaces. Especially the Canadians who arrived in Canada and were part of the building of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms as citizens of Canada in 1982, saw that the charter asked for a Canadian's right to be treated equally under the law because the charter guaranteed broad equality rights and under other fundamental rights such as freedom of expression, freedom of religion. And here Sikhs are seeing turbans for the same reason, which is a reminder that all humans are sovereign, humans are royal, and therefore ultimately equal. So in this picture, which my co-presenter Imrit will be explaining in a few minutes, you see the 5 men have left their beloved home in a hope of a better life, and they are faced with 2 options. The option to assimilate by cutting their hair and removing their turbans, or wear darker ones that won't attract attention and allow them to wear turbans. So on to Imrit Kaur Garewal.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. So I will take the time to kind of explain the photo and the next couple of slides. So I will follow along with Vineet and kind of move the presentation forward in that direction. So yeah, I think one of the first things that I would like to say definitely is that this is a photograph that was taken in 1908 by a street photographer named Philip Timms. And this was taken at the intersection of Granville and Hastings in Vancouver, what this picture essentially did is that it captured the journey of Sikh pioneers at a time, like Puneet said, it was rather very difficult for Sikh men and women in the community to thrive. And one of the reasons why this became a pioneer image of that journey of the pioneer Sikhs is that you can see that, you know, the men in these picture, they're not the focus of the picture by any way, shape, or form, but somehow they end up attracting the attention of the viewer. And what that and the feeling that it evokes within the Sikh community is that of resilience, is that of eternal optimism in the face of adversity, which we call the Chardi Kala. And you know, when we're looking at this picture years later, a century later, somehow we wanted to reimagine this journey, reimagine this photograph from a 21st century perspective. So we can look at that journey, be appreciative of that journey, but also chronicle and note what is missing from that Sikh journey. So reimagining this from a 21st century perspective from a feminist stance meant that we wanted to include women in these pictures as well, because up until 1919, Sikh women were not allowed to join the Sikh men who were already working in Canada, and their children were not allowed to be with them in the country. And so family reunification was something that was not happening, because these Sikh men or people from South Asia were treated as laborers who were only meant to build a country and then eventually go back home. So when we decided to redo the picture, we wanted to ensure that the frame in which these men are shot, this is not where, so that they're not out of focus. We wanted this to be a focus. And having the women was even more special because in 2019, it marked the 100-year anniversary of women being allowed to join these men. And what that reflects is that, you know, women were present in spirit, if not physically present in this context, and they were equally central to this Canadian journey then as well as now. So we'll talk about some of the key issues that we've faced as a Sikh community when it comes to turbans and the right to freely practice our religion in Canada. So on the first, on the far left corner, you would see Baltej Singh Dhillon on the slide. In the early 1800s, Baltej Singh Dhillon was a young man who always dreamed of joining the police force, wanted to give back to his country, and wanted to do it with pride while keeping his faith intact. Baltej Singh Dhillon, unfortunately, that story was not a fairy tale story, but it was a pioneer story in the sense that it allowed people from other faiths to be able to practice their faith freely, but also be a part of the RCMP. One of the key issues that we talk about when we talk about Baltej Singh Dhillon was the backlash that his case had, because one of the things that was said about him was that somehow choosing to practice his faith while serving in the RCMP means he's less of a Canadian, and that his values would be diluted, and it was implied as if both cannot exist. So Baltej Singh Dhillon's case set a precedent for other religious minorities within Canada at that time, because it allowed them to participate and enter the police force. And that was one of the challenges that was fought. And this case was also within the Supreme Court of Canada. And then fast forward to 2006, we have Gurbaksh Singh Multani, who is a young boy at that time, who accidentally drops one of his 5 Ks, which is the kakars, so the 5 key pillars of the Sikh faith that you adore. And the backlash that Multani faced was that a lot of parents and people wanted to ensure that their right to safety is ensured because they did not feel safe as a result of Multani carrying his kirpan, which is a blunt sword, one of the key aspects of the Sikh faith. So it really challenges you to think whether the right to practice one's religion freely, is it an absolute right, or does this right have some sort of like limitations on it? And is someone's right to practice freely, practice one's religion freely, less or more than someone's right to safety? So one of the things that came out of this case as a result of the Supreme Court judgment was that no right is bigger than the other right, and that the freedom to practice one's faith is actually an absolute right without any limits. Very, I would say, groundbreaking case, which is something that helped maneuver these conversations if they ever came up again. But when we talk about these cases, somehow you will notice that the same things come back and resurface. So with Bill 21, I'm sure a lot of you would have followed. Bill 21 is being talked about as a secular law, which basically is prohibiting any public servant to wear any visible symbols of faith, because that would mean that the state is not secular anymore. So within this time, we see Amrit Kaur, who is a young teacher who is graduating from school and hopes to be a teacher one day. But it's the same day that Bill 21 is passed, and now she will never be able to look for a teaching job in Quebec until and unless she chooses to remove her dastar. And so we wanted to present a female story as well, and she becomes the national interest story for all mainstream media who wanted to talk to her about this, as she herself said that this meant that she was a refugee in her own country, where she would not be able to seek employment and had to choose between her faith and employment. Ultimately, Amrit had to leave Quebec and find a teaching job in British Columbia, but as we're talking about it, we don't know how Bill 21 will unfold. But one of the key things that I think we should take away from this is that we do have a Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms that lists our rights very explicitly. But then at the end of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, we have a notwithstanding clause, which means that you can invoke that clause in order to undermine the rights and privileges that precede the clause. So we really have to engage whether or not we are truly free, or whether these are some of the things that we need to evaluate within our own Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, which is quite frankly like the backbone of Canadian identity. And not so far ago, we also have, just give me 1 second, I'm sorry. Yes, we also we want to watch a video now, which.
We believe in celebrating diversity. Give it a round of applause for Site Diversity. A round of applause for diversity. All right. Sorry. Yeah. So, it's so. We can tell by your votes. We all know. That's it. It's okay. So. What this is, we don't want to be intimidated by hate. We don't want hatred to ruin a positive event, right? We don't want hatred to ruin a positive event. So let's show people how we would treat someone with love. We welcome you. We welcome you. We welcome you. We love you. We support you and we love you. We support you, we love you. We all here. Everyone in this room loves you. We all support you. We believe in your rights. We all believe in your rights. This room is a room filled of people that are loving and that will support you. But this isn't the best way to do it. But it's okay. We're going to talk some more. So my friends, let's just say this is a little bit awkward. But it's okay. We're not intimidated by hatefulness. We're not intimidated. So, it's okay. Sorry. It's okay. It's okay. We're not worried about this. This is okay. We're not worried about this. It's okay. We're not worried about this. We're okay. Wait, so let her just speak as much as she wants. It's okay. We have no problem with it. My friends, we'll just sort this situation out. We'll be right back. I love you all. These are things that happen. It's okay. No big deal. We're not going to be intimidated. It's all good. Okay, maybe it is solved with already. All right. So listen, this is so incredible. This incredible amount of love. Okay, we're good. It's okay.
So yeah, I think like the reason why we wanted to show this video is that in here you have someone who wants to be the leader of a major Canadian federal party and is met with a heckler who, quite frankly, is very ignorant and has not done any homework that she needs to do in order to engage with someone who wants to be a public servant. So one of the things that we do notice and we have felt is that there is a huge rise in Islamophobia since 9/11, and it has impacted a lot of minority communities, which means that they have been wrongfully targeted or they have been spoken to in ways that quote unquote are not Canadian, right? And so we wanted to show this video and say that even though someone can be as accomplished in trying to see a high office, sometimes a turban can be misconstrued because of lack of education, and that is something that we hope that doesn't happen for future generations, because we believe, you know, education is one of the key ways that we can do this. So there was this one video, and the other video that we wanted to show was another one. Give me 1 second.
Sounds great. Sounds great. Bonjour, monsieur. Hello. How are you? Good to see you. So you okay? Yes. Pleasure to meet you. I think Canadians look like all sorts of people. That's the beauty of Canada. That's okay. I don't agree, sir. Hey, but this is Canada. You can do like whatever you like. All right. Take care. Thanks.
So yeah, fast forward to the 2019 federal elections. We also have Jagmeet Singh, who is tackled by someone in Quebec who says that you would look more Canadian if you cut off your turban. And quite frankly, the idea that someone could say something like that is very upsetting in this day and age, because there's no one look that a Canadian has, and a turban, the lack of a turban or the not lack of a turban does not determine how Canadian we can be. So we wanted to talk about some of these challenges and the experiences of Sikh Canadians who live their lives and who are trying to be a part of the social, cultural, and political fabric of this country. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to hand over the mic to one of my other colleagues, and his name is Parminder Singh Gill. So yeah, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Parminder here. I hope that you've been finding this presentation very informative as I'm listening to my colleagues. I think it's it's like an encyclopedia. It takes you right from the ancient history of turbans through to contemporary politics, and now you've got the good fortune of looking at my face as I get a turban tied, because I'm a turbanless Sikh right now. And for that reason, we've got my wonderful friend and volunteer here, Hira Singh. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch over into a turban tying demonstration. The turban that we'll be tying is a Punjabi style turban, and the organizer, what would I do here? Just use that chair. Okay. And technical difficulties were. Now we should. There we are. All right. Hello, everyone. This is Hira. Hira, say hi.
Hi guys.
Turban, no turban.
Yeah.
Soon to have a turban.
Yeah, he's gonna get outfitted with the turban right
Uh-huh. So as we begin this process, Hira's going to initially speak in terms of the materials and what we're doing, and we're going to go through some misconceptions.
now. Yeah. So the first thing is I'm gonna be tying this piece of cloth. It's cotton, and also a turban is also gonna be a cotton fabric as well. So this cloth, first we tie it just around his head to secure his hair so it doesn't move around when we're doing the turban tying process. So I'm gonna get Parminder to move his hair in a proper spot.
You got it. Ladies and gentlemen, don't get too excited. We're going to undo my hair, make it a little bit more, we're going to make it a little bit looser, actually, so that the form of the turban is a little bit more neat. Because if it's looser up here, then as the turban comes around, it will be neater. Trust us, we are professionals.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So I'm just gonna secure this
Okay.
and all your hair.
Okay.
I think Roxy is work around.
So this is the base layer,
Just a bit.
and we call this a 50. And did you talk about the, okay, so this is an interesting fact. When the British instituted turbans within their colonial regiments, the British colonial regiments, Sikhs used to wear turbans that were very large, like many meters, tens of meters, I would say, and they would come in like versions. So there'd be a first turban, then you tie a second turban on top of that, sometimes even multiple turbans. So when the British saw this, that Sikhs tie turbans in 2s, 3s, and also in tens of meters, I think they thought to themselves, this isn't good. We need to be able to manage the efficiency of this turban tying. So what they did was they instituted this as the first turban, and they called it a 50 because it was 50%. And then the second turban, which is right here, is not called the 100, but it's assumed. This completes the deal.
Right.
All right.
So we're gonna begin tying over here. I'm gonna get you to hold the rest of the turban.
So I'm holding the turban in my lap.
And I'm gonna get you to hold it right about here.
Okay.
Right. And then this is
Is this
so this turban we're about to tie, it's a 5.5 meter size turban. So you guys can get the idea of how much material we're gonna be using. Hold it right. You can just hold it right there.
okay? All right.
So I get this question asked by multiple people at work or
Swing this way when you speak, so that they can hear you clearly. Like when you come this way, then approach the question.
just gonna move them for now.
So Hira, you were saying?
So I was saying, like, I get this question asked a lot, that why are there so many colors? Does colors mean anything? And this is like, I don't know, some people have said to these individuals that this color means that I'm like, my mood is different today, but that's not true. Color doesn't signify anything, but it's also all up to the individual that is tying and whatever they're wearing, if they want to match to their clothing. So
In other words, it's entirely subjective.
it's very subjective.
The colors are entirely subjective. If you want to be fashion forward and match your socks with your turban, you're welcome to do so. And Hira just said I do that. Now, this is a 5.5 meter length turban, correct, Hira?
Yes.
So this is a cotton material, 5.5 meter. And as he makes his way around and around to tie this turban on me, those 5.5 meters, that length doesn't really mean anything in particular.
Yeah.
It just is a preference, right?
It is a-
So Hida, you're actually the perfect model because your turban is not 5. It's actually smaller than that, correct? How many meters is yours?
The one you have is like 5.5, but it's like stitched in the middle.
Yeah.
Mine is 5 meters, but it's like just single layer top. Right?
Okay, so now we're getting complex, folks.
Yeah.
There's singles, then there's doubles, there's stitching, there's non-stitching.
The one I'm tying on you, it's stitched. So
Yes.
it's more traditional.
Yes.
Where like the one I'm wearing is when like Punjabis migrated to like Europe or even Africa.
Yeah.
So they changed up the style a little bit. So there's so many different styles you can look. Like I learned how to tie a turban on YouTube, so
Yeah.
if anybody can learn it,
Yes.
right?
Yes. I feel like you're judging me a little bit as he says that. He says anyone
because
can
we don't
learn
know
it.
how to tie.
I get ragged about this all the time, and one of these days we'll get it.
Yeah, no, I think I'm gonna have to start teaching you.
Ida, this is a presentation.
Huh? I think I'm
You
gonna
can't be scolding me in front of an audience. Folks, we hope you're enjoying our demonstration so far. He is doing it quite quickly. Do you think we should do a headshot so that they can see how the layers are coming together so far?
Yeah, bring it closer.
Okay. And
You stay there.
is that a good view?
Lift your head up. Yeah. Now go to the side. Like all these layers.
Okay, okay. How about the other side?
And I see this picture online all the time. It's like there's a Punjabi guy wearing a turban. What's up? The people then. Go stay back. Move your legs.
Yeah, yeah. So colors are subjective. Size is variable.
Can you hold this up?
I've explained the 50
No, hold your head
concept. Okay, now I gotta hold my head still.
Your hair is so silky smooth, it probably shifting.
It's like a lot of the foundations of homes here in Winnipeg. Yeah, that was shift. So what he's effectively doing is he's realigning my turban. And that's a common practice. Now, I really want you to showcase what you're using to kind of detail.
So it's like a little metal.
It's called a bodge.
It's called a bod, but it's also
It's like a
the
pen.
best friend of the.
It's a best friend of a Sikh. And it's a best friend of a Sikh because, you got to look fly while you're out there. And the bodge will be used constantly throughout the day to make sure hair is tidy within the turban. And then the layers that you see over here, which do not represent wisdom, because I'm sure you can make that assessment just from my talk today, not the wisest, but these layers are purely, it's a matter of how you fold the layers of the turban, right? So the bodge will be used to make it very tidy and clean.
Sometimes, like, I go to work. I sometimes decide to tie a bigger one.
Okay.
And all my coworkers are like, "Why is there more layers today? Is there something mean something?" And I joke around with them. Today I was announced a prince in my country. Right?
I was announced a prince in my country, he says.
So I decided to wear a bigger button, and they actually think about it. They're like, "Oh, really? Like, does this actually?"
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah.
No, honestly, you get the funniest questions when you're wearing a turban. And growing up, you kind of have to just learn to roll with the punches because at the end of the day, they're inquisitive questions, they're curious questions. Sometimes they're not the best intentioned questions, but
it's always
we do strongly believe that, the more that we can get information out there, the better we can increase knowledge generally. I think the better off we are as a society because, people just cooperate better. They know things. Your baseline of knowledge is understood. Education.
Like, you gotta educate everybody about it, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
if they don't know anything, they're asking questions coming up to you, which is a good thing, right? Because they're not just judging or
Yeah.
going on online.
We'd much rather have a question than not.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Hida, how we doing? Mine looking good?
Oh, you're looking fly, man. I think we're gonna start doing lessons for you. And so you can start tying it in yourself.
Another alignment. Okay, the alignment is good.
Alignment.
All right. Good. You can see my 50? You better be able to see my 50.
Yeah, we can see your 50.
We got people from the Pembina Active Living Center here.
Well, you need your glasses. This
Okay.
can be a mission.
So now this is going to be tough, but we're going to try and voila. What do you guys think? So that's a rhetorical question. You're on mute. But I know I look fly. Do I look fly? So there's your turban demonstration. And I guess I better jump right back into the presentation. We're at 7:41. I know we're coming to a wind down because we also got to get into Q&A. And all jokes aside, we love it when you ask questions. The more questions, the better. We're just telling you some anecdotes about sometimes the questions that we get and maybe why they seem sometimes silly at times. But it's all in good. It's all in good faith. So let's switch over to the presentation. Do I just screen? All right. Boom. So do you remember when I was talking about 50 and then how this turban is a Punjabi turban? Well, if you look at the image on the absolute left and you see a man wearing, oh, sorry about that. This happens all the time. How do I move this? My apologies, folks. Sorry about that. And that happens from time to time. Okay, so it seems like we should be better. Okay, so the image on the left showcases what you would see, what you would refer to as an Akali Singh or a Nihang Singh, and this is a warrior class Singh, Sikh, I should say. And if you look at his turban, you see that not only is it very tall, but it's also clad with metal in it. And so this is a very much a warrior turban. Sovereignty was a very big concept for Sikhs. So this was not an uncommon look. This was a very common look. And even today in some of the diaspora, you'll see a resurgence of this look. But how that man is appearing is, in my opinion, it's rather, neat to see a turban of that style. He looks very fierce. When you're walking with such a tall stature and then you've got all that metal clad within it, I think it says something. Now, what you see next to that is an image of, once again, the British. Oh, phone call. You see next to that is an image of a British regiment, again in a British colony, which is most likely India at this stage. And if you look closely, you'll see that everyone is now regulated to wear a turban. So the bottom three individuals in the middle, those are 100% certainly all Caucasians, and all three of them are wearing turbans. That says a lot about how colonial powers and British rule has very much kind of, in a way, what's the term, fetishized turbans. They made it an attraction almost, right? When the British controlled India, postcards, designs, whether it be, so for example, fashion, the terminologies they used for parties, they always tried to exotify it. So the intention was that for all the patriots living in those colonies, they wanted a very stereotypical version, a stereotypical description of that country. So for example, imagine you are a British colonel, you're living in India, and you're writing postcards back to your family and your loved ones in Britain. Often those postcards showed very cartoonistic features of India. It might show the Golden Temple, it might show a man with an elaborate turban, but that was part of what made it exotic, adventurous, exciting, because that's what it sort of was to the British at that time. It was a backyard for the British to explore. Now, with that being said, we've seen the image on the right, which is that of a Scottish regiment wearing a tartan turban. Once again, it's a type of a cultural appropriation of the turban, and so that's an example as well. Moving on is this next slide, which just kind of shows you what your contemporary Sikh looks like. We showed you historical. Now we just wanted to give you an idea of what you may see on your day-to-day. The gentleman on the left, the one with the orange shirt, he's wearing your typical Punjabi style turban. The gentleman on your right, the one whose cross section you see, that is a turban that is very common in Great Britain to this day. So if you go to England, you'll see a lot of Sikh gentlemen wearing that style of a turban. It's far more circular. It's not nearly as triangular as the example previous to it. Then at the bottom, there's just a little bit of diversity. Often turbans are donned by elder men, but that's not an exclusive case. And so there's a representation of an elderly gentleman. But then on the bottom right, you'll see a young female who's rather fashion forward. She's dressed quite well, and she's wearing her own version of a turban, which in many ways is its own rendition. So my intention here was to just kind of show you the variety of turbans, contemporarily speaking, and also just kind of highlight how a turban, a turban is such a sentimental article of faith and clothing for Sikhs that when you hear about examples of fashion houses creating turbans for their own commercial purposes. So for example, there's examples of Gucci, the brand, coming out with a turban hat that was part of their fashion cycle. And for prior to this presentation, you might have thought it's just fashion people are a little bit they're strange. They do things in a very odd manner, but they do it to be provocative. But now maybe after this presentation, you can understand why it might hurt the sentiments of the people that have so closely tied their identity to the turban. So when we see an Italian luxury fashion producer release a very poorly made turban, call it a hat, call it a turban, and sell it for $700 on the internet, it's gonna cause a little bit of a rumble. And that's okay, but it gives you an idea of why the turban is a topic of discussion even to this day in so many different realms. That was an example of fashion. Previously, we talked about politics. Like any identity, it's going to mix and mash and collide in all facets of life. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed that Q&A time. What do we have? Yeah, question time. So maybe Dr. Sandra moderates this. Is that how it works?
Dr. Sandra, you're on mute, I believe.
Yes, okay, there. So I had a couple of questions, which is the turban heavy to wear all day? And is there kind of like maybe a pre-wrapped turban that you can just put on in the morning, or do you have to tie it every morning?
So thank you for your questions first and foremost. We appreciate you putting yourself out there and asking these questions. We invite you to do as much as you can. Get them out there. Let's do this. So as per the first question, does it feel heavy? You know what? I think it's a matter of habit, right? I would say as a child, brushing my teeth seemed like a chore, but then you start brushing your teeth enough that it becomes second nature. Similarly with a turban, when you first begin donning a turban, certainly your ears might hurt. It might seem like a weight. It might even get hot. But with that comes all these novelties. You know, the turban has adapted with time too. There's better materials. There's materials you'll wear in the summer. There's materials you'll wear in the winter. And with that being said, you also adapt to it. You know, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like a weight upon you. Rather, it feels like any other part of clothing that you wear throughout the day, right? And secondly, can you get a turban that you just don in the morning and you don't have to freshly wrap every day? Yes, you absolutely can get that. As we were mentioning, I think for folks like me who struggle to learn how to tie a turban with its intricacies at an early age, oftentimes we will look for solutions like that, but the turban in its original form is always tied daily, and it's unwrapped and then it is wrapped freshly. So in other words, the true essence of a turban is something that you would tie fresh every day.
Yeah. So the reason I'm asking is because I will sometimes wear saris, but I took them to a store to get them pre-pleated because with 7 meters of fabric and trying to tie it all the time, I kind of took a little shortcut and got them parts of it pre-pleated. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, and I just wanted to kind of also give clarification that earlier in the presentation, we talked about how there are different types of turbans and people wear turbans in different cultures, in different religions, and in different parts of the world. So you will find turbans that are pre-tied and wrapped, and I think they're very popular in India in different cultures and religions that are not Sikh. I think when we do talk about turban in the context of the Sikh religion, I have never seen in my 29 years of life a case of a pre-tied turban being donned by a Sikh. The practice of a Sikh to wear a fresh turban every single morning is kind of tied to the sacredness of it, which is that every morning you are preparing yourself to put on a reminder of you standing for the equality of all and the dignity and the freedom of self-expression. And so it is mandated when, especially Sikhs that get baptized, and they're mandated to wear turbans, that they wear it fresh every single morning. Or not only in morning, but every time they put on a turban. So even if they, if they're taking a nap and they decide to take a turban off and wear something lighter to cover their head, they will wake up and wear a fresh turban.
So there were a couple of other questions. Louise asked, can a person put on a turban by themselves, or do you always need help from someone else to put one on?
That's a great question. And you can certainly put a turban on by yourself. In fact, most of the Sikhs they tie their own turban. I think just for the sake of the presentation, Hira Tur is actually a professional turban tire, what does that mean in the Sikh context? Which is that there are a lot of kids in diaspora who may not, grow up wearing turbans, and they may not be as well positioned to wear a turban that they think looks good on them. So oftentimes, especially on weddings and on special occasions, you'll have someone as skilled as Hira who'll come in and tie a turban for you. And so we thought, even for this presentation, we wanted to give you an exquisite example of turban tying. So we had Hira demonstrate the tying on her mender.
Great. So there was another question from Louise. Is there a certain age when Sikhs are supposed to start wearing turbans?
That's another excellent question. I think there is actually no mandated age to start wearing a turban. So you'll notice that it actually looks different when you are younger. So I wish we had an example of a young Sikh boy with a head covering. So when you're young, as a boy or a girl, you might just be covering your head with a small cloth, a bandana, And as you're growing older, you might go through a special ceremony that, you know, a religious leader or someone in your community might give you a turban, and you know that starts your journey. There might be a special kind of prayer associated with it, but it depends from every single household, I think. So we'll give you a quick example of what maybe a turban on a young kid looks like.
Yeah, I don't think we can see that very well, but yeah, sorry, we can't see it very well. But
sure.
just related to what you were saying, Bill is asking, is there a kind of a rite of passage, and is there, like, what does the celebration look like, which you just touched on, but at what age would that happen?
For sure. So this celebration, again, is a personal preference between families. So it could be done as a communal celebration where you would go to the place of worship, which for Sikhs is called a gurudwara, and you would do a prayer similar to a prayer that would be done on a wedding day. It's a short prayer that is quite standardized, called an ardas. There might be special excerpts read from the scripture on that day by the young boy or by his family, or a girl as well. And that's called a dastar bandi, which literally translates to the tying of the turban. And so from that age onwards, the child might start wearing a turban or might start practicing to wear a turban. But in other households, this might be a private ceremony, or you know, a child might have visited a camp over the summer or have gone to see his cousin and they might have started to wear a turban. So there is no specific start date to wearing a turban or to covering your head. You'll notice that young kids are covering their head with small cloths, or they're starting to tie turbans as young as, you know, 5 or 7 or 14, or you might see someone who's worn their first turban in university, etc. So
I also noticed that sometimes I see on Sikh men, they have the braided beard. So is it like braided, or is it I'm not always sure if it's like a cloth or braid, or what exactly is it?
For sure. So as you'll notice in the slide that we have up, that the beard is open and long for every single model in this picture. But you'll notice, especially in the older generation, that Sikh men would actually take their beard and they would roll it up in a cloth, which would then, you know, be tied under their turban. And that is actually, earlier in the presentation, we talked about a very significant shift in the turban aesthetic when the Punjab was colonized by the British Army. And so beard was a hazard, I guess you can say, if you are using guns or military arsenal, for example. So they actually noticed that when Sikh soldiers were using guns, it would sometimes catch fire from the gunpowder. And so it was the British military that mandated that Sikh men with beard tie their beards into like a very neatly stowed away beard. And I think as time goes by and the farther we move away from that colonial period, you'll notice that the beards are being freed from the colonization as well.
Okay. All right, so I'm just going to ask anyone else if they have any questions. You can either turn on your mic and ask the question or throw it in the chat, because we're about 1 minute away from the end of the presentation, which was, by the way, very excellent. We have colleagues and friends who are Sikh, but sometimes it's a little awkward to ask questions because you don't want to be sounding like offending someone. So any questions, please feel free to ask. Connie said, awesome, she learned a lot. Other questions? Okay. Anything else the presenters would like to wrap up with?
So I'll just
Thank you for the excellent presentation.
Thank you so much, Harjeet Auntie.
We had a pleasure doing it.
Thank you so much, Pembina Active Living, for inviting us to do this presentation. This topic is very near and dear to our hearts, and we're absolutely thankful for this opportunity to talk about it.
Sorry, we're just getting some feedback. Okay, so I just wanted to say thank you as well. I've had the opportunity to listen to at least a couple of you prior to, and this was great. It was another way of me learning about other cultures and symbolism and other religions. I'm always interested in what other cultures are like and how they're similar to and different from mine. So I'm going to thank everyone again for attending. I really appreciate that you took the interest to be here tonight. And we welcome you to other presentations coming up in September to November. We have several lecture series on diversity and inclusion. So we're going to be advertising them in our newsletter, our weekly email. And we hope to also, since Connie Newman is here, maybe advertise it through the Manitoba Association for Senior Centers as well, so that more people can learn about other cultures and really learn to appreciate that we have so many wonderful commonalities. Thank you again, everyone, and we're going to sign off.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Good.